Thanks for staying with us here on The Fix. Now we scour the Sunday papers to tell you what's around the corner and, of course, why they chose the stories that they have chosen to lead. For this, I'm joined by political commentator Eusebius Mckaiser. Eusebius, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you, Karima.
The big story, of course, President Cyril Ramaphosa has swollen Yana's skeletons.
Yeah, and I think if I was in the president's camp from a communications point of view, you would be annoyed because the timing is horrible.
Yes.
In preparing for today's show, I was trying to anticipate what might be on the front pages of the newspapers. And from a governance and an ANC point of view, you'd have hoped that policy discussions such as the recommendations of the Constitutional Review Committee might dominate Sunday morning coffee chat between you, me, and the engaged viewers of ENCA. You would have thought that discussions about who the best person is to succeed Sean the Sheep as the head of the National Prosecuting Authority is more important, or maybe some really dry but critically important conversation around the economy, because we need to get that right. So it really is bad news that both City Press, but rightly so, and the Sunday Times are focusing on this. As the Sunday Times header says here, dodgy cash turns up heat on Cyril. So it is a massive scandal, and they need to deal with it better than they have.
Now, of course, the president has tried to kind of spin this, right? He answered the first question, and he was very emphatic, saying, if my son is involved in anything, I'll walk him to the police station myself. And then, of course, you know, the kicker came later, and now he has to not only pay the money back, but admit that there was, in fact, a campaign strategy that collected money to get Cyril elected into office. Now, in ANC parlance, this is, of course, going to affirm that white monopoly capital was in charge. But we also know, of course, that Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma's campaign didn't run on, you know, fish and chips. It ran on money. Money is the driver. And for me, the question here is not necessarily just how Cyril responds, because it's not just Cyril that is on the line, it's the ANC that's on the line. You've argued for the modernization of the succession campaign and plan and the way they do things, and for accommodating the need for people to put up their hands. Does the story now put that question front and center?
Oh, it absolutely does. And I mean, you and I see politics similarly but differently in many respects. So I thought to myself, will the commentariat and the opposition be unfair towards Cyril in terms of what he knew at the time that he answered the question, right? And as you said in exchange there with Professor Ben Turok earlier, one can, and I think it's the right spin. I'm not saying you're spinning, but I would have done the same. If you, in the presidency, and you say, but what about the larger question in terms of the connections between money and politics? What about the EFF and the DA's own lack of appetite for transparency in relation to
In fact, the EFF is opposing this bill that is going through, talking about
What
transparency.
about the other candidates inside the ANC, and where did their money come from? And then, of course, you cast the net wider with Ben by saying, what about around the world where this happens? But here's the problem, Karima, that there's objective reality that matters, but politics, like a lot of life, also turns on perception. And for better or worse, because of Ramaphosa, and in part because the commentariat, I think, were putting the cart before the horse in terms of what he can do very quickly, he has been branded as this politically virtuous person who is the second political coming since Nelson Mandela. And because of that context, this kind of scandal will land worse for the president than maybe it ought reasonably to do. But it is in part because we held him up to a standard that he should never have implicitly accepted through his silence.
Exactly. I mean, a lot of people were saying things like Zuma is unshameable. But Cyril Ramaphosa has that problem. He can be shamed. He is being shamed.
Yes, and I think that Samkela Maseko's point was absolutely spot on, precisely because of the aesthetics around Jacob Zuma as the ruralitarian that got to the union buildings, and then you have the dulcet tones of Cyril Ramaphosa. People wrongly contrasted the two as if they are chalk and cheese, but in fact, Cyril comes from the ANC, and in some respects is as ANC in his political DNA as the former president. So here's the challenge for the ANC. It now has to do a better job at dealing with its own incumbency, as Ben said, and then demonstrating that as quickly as possible between now and May.
Yeah, I did say to you that there is a lot of similarities between the two men. But here's the thing. So when I was reading the front papers and I was thinking, what am I going to ask Eusebius? I thought, Is this the chink in the armor of Cyril Ramaphosa that the opposition needed? Because remember how hysterical they became. Because Zuma was gone, they had no more stick to beat the ANC with. And here was everyone excited about, Cyril Ramaphosa as the potential answer for everything. And you were saying they are hurrying, they are rushing, they're making tactical mistakes. Is this the first chink that they have? And can they build on this? And is this enough to give them a front lead again in the conversation as alternative?
No, I actually don't think so. I thought about that long and hard last night and this morning, Karima. I think the public will give the president, and I mean, obviously, I can turn out to be wrong. This is speculative analysis. But I think the public will probably say, you know what? The president can be given the benefit of the doubt on this one.
Yeah.
If I was part of the machinery or the political sort of inside the brains trust of the EFF and the DA, I will go back to the basics if we just shift your position for the moment. You have got to go into 2019 doing two things. You have to tell the public, what have you done with empirical proof where you have governed, if you are the DA, and if you are the EFF, you've got to overcome the challenge that Professor Ben Kirok gave you this morning, and it's a reasonable one, even though he's an ANC stalwart, which is to say, you've got to have a clear ideological positioning that shows that you are different to the ANC in terms of the vision for the state, better theoretical capacity than the SACP, and a couple of signature policies. You can't continue to have negative campaigning that is based on one. And we can genuinely debate whether it was a lie or whether there was an honest lack of information at the time of giving it. So if they run with this story, that's fine. Run with it for 5 minutes, but then get back to defining who you are in the opposition.
And of course, that's the point that my sparring partner, who's not here today, raises in his column. He, in fact, says the DA was meant to unleash its policies onto the country. Gwen and Gwenya, the kind of, new policies are in the DA. We're meant to tell us how this equal opportunity society is going to work and why we should vote for the DA. And we haven't seen anything yet. And what we've seen is the DA latching onto the stompies, like we call it, to try and get back up that horse. But we don't know what the DA stands for. We don't know what's happened to that diversity clause. And that's a real point that Peter has.
Karima, Peter Bruce's column was spot on, and you know that Peter and I often disagree. I also thought it's laughable for many of the DA types on social media to lampoon Peter and Max du Preez as if these are guys that are well known for sucking up to the ANC. That is absolutely not true. Peter, in a sense, is a bit of a floating voter like me. We're prepared to vote for anyone who is compelling. But here's the interesting thing. I mean, yesterday, let's talk about what happened in the last 24 hours on the political scene. You have Mmusi Maimane saying to voters that actually the EFF and the ANC are indistinguishable, that what happened this week in Parliament with the adoption of the Constitutional Review Committee's recommendation, or its imminent adoption, is in fact an example that if you vote for the ANC or for the EFF, you are voting in
for the same thing.
But they are the ones who have political arrangements with them after 2016. And that speaks to Peter.
Get on with Herman Mashaba.
Yeah, so, you know, you are the ones after the 2016 local elections who are bedfellows with these guys. And I think the ANC, and again, we've said this on this platform before and other platforms, the ANC, as much as it has all of these mistakes that it's making in the state and in the party, and your panel, I think, was excellent in outlining what these are in detail, nevertheless, they have the gift of a ideologically and theoretically incoherent main opposition parties.
Yes, absolutely. Now, of course, the other big thing that is making news headlines is the fact that we now finally have this shortlist out for the 4 candidates that have been selected by this panel to replace Shaun the Sheep. I mean, if you look at it, I was speaking with, Professor James Grant about the fact that the list was so weirdly put together that someone like Moponi Noko could think that you could succeed, Shaun. How did they get to these 4, and are they the right 4?
Well, the president wanted 4 names. He's been given 5. I would imagine that the 2 women candidates, who are both obviously excellent because they've met the threshold requirement, but also because I think we need to do better on both in terms of the class analysis of Ben Kirok, but also the gender identity analysis when it comes to politics. They should have a pretty good shot. But it was an ad hoc process. It was suboptimal. It was a case of do you introduce another Afrikaans word next to your gatvol usage this morning? It was a toenadering from the president to civil society to say, okay, I don't want to be emasculated constitutionally by having a body take the decision, but I'm going to have this ad hoc body interview the candidates and give me the names. I can't comment on them. I follow the law quite closely because it was incredibly rushed. So once he has made his pick before 19 December, we're going to have to go back to the drawing board and ask ourselves, can we in future have a far better and a more patient process designed into perpetuity? And this one was very ad hoc.
Absolutely, and to get to the right candidate. Eusebius, thank you so much for doing a brilliant job looking at our stories. And of course, next week, everyone is going to be focused on Pravin Gordhan. That's going to be going to the Zondo Commission of Inquiry. That's your fix for the week. Take care and have a good week ahead.